Okay, another one of our questions was how sea level rise would affect Dog River. Since we're a tidal stream and the water comes and goes with the tide, certainly sea level rise will have some meaning for us. This is a sea level curve showing the advance of sea level from 1900 up to 2020. This is satellite data here. And there's really no denying the fact that it is slowly but surely coming up. The house I live in has a seawall that my aunt put in and her husband back in 1953. It's concrete, it has a date carved in the front of it. And I know the water never used to come over it at a high tide when they first came in, but it reliably comes over it at a high tide now. So there are definitely going to be some effects from sea level rise for us. One of my students did this, and I think it's pertinent to how we're going to handle this. This is a map showing areas of Dog River that are almost always salty, areas of Dog River that are sometimes salty and sometimes fresh. Notice there's one here, and then the main part of the river. There's one here in Halsmill Creek and one down here in Rabbit Creek. And then fresh water is the light blue above that. It's important to understand this one is very, very long in distance compared to this one. And the reason for that is that Eslava Creek has no headwaters out in West Mobile, so it has no hydraulic head to push the salt water back. Halsmill Creek, on the other hand, has a very large watershed all the way out to Schillinger, so there's a constant flow of fresh water pushing down, pushing against the salt water. So our transition zone here is very narrow. Rabbit Creek's transition zone, again, is fairly long because there's not much elevation in their headwaters. This has important implications for where things are living and where things are dying. And if you were going to work on a living shoreline in one of these areas, what types of plants you might want to plant. So in this area of transition, what we see is as it gets saltier, which it will as sea level rises, the cypress trees that live right in the water will be stressed and may start to die. And slowly but surely, vegetation that's associated with salty areas, things like black needle rush, will move further upstream. This is important because during this period of time when those changes are taking place, the shorelines are somewhat destabilized because the freshwater vegetation is not as robust as it used to be. And the saltwater vegetation has not moved in as strongly as it will in the future. So erosion is worse during this period of time. The red dots, let's see, mark sites with salinity measurements. Looks like there's other dots here. 3 dots, 4 dots. The red dots here are places where we have monitors who've actually been using a refractometer to test salinity over time. The purple dot here is a site that has not been testing salinity, but has instead been testing what we call hardness. If you know, salt water is very, very hard, and as salt water moves up, if it's mixed in here, the hardness will go up. So hardness is kind of a proxy for salinity. So we have data from these sites that I want to show you. Is salinity increasing? The green is for the Grand Mariner, the blue is across from the Alba Club, and the red is up close to Robinson Bayou of those sites that I showed you on the map before. Well, it certainly does look like, particularly during the last 3 years, salinity has increased. Now, whether it's going to continue with that or not, we don't know. These peaks are usually happening from October to January, where the salinity has been exceptionally high. I mean, 18 parts per thousand, okay? You'll notice it pulses every year. This is associated with the dry times in the fall. Probably this was a wet fall here, and these are not as severe as those. This has had an effect on aquatic vegetation in Dog River and in Halsmill Creek and probably Rabbit Creek as well. Things that people were complaining about. Some of the aquatic nuisance species are all of a sudden gone. The floating fern that used to be everywhere. Gosh, this year, the year back here in 22, that was everywhere, and it was a nuisance species. And now it has virtually disappeared because it does not grow in salt water. So we not only will have a transition on the shoreline vegetation, there will be transitions on the aquatic vegetation as well, if this is sustained. Now, this is clearly dependent on heavy rainfall type times. So if we have a rainy year throughout the fall, that salt water is held back farther and cannot move as far upstream. But when we have summers, end of summer, that it's dry and the fall is dry, salt water can move farther up. This is the hardness readings for that site that was in purple on Hallsmill Creek. And you can see here that things, again, you've got the little pulses where it gets harder in the fall and then really hard here. So things have definitely changed for the last 25, 24, 23 even. Those 3 years, we've had higher levels of salt water in Dog River than we've had in the past. Now, again, if we had starting lots and lots of rain, maybe that might be reversed, but eventually this is going to be the story. Some of the aquatic plants, this is the floating fern, the salvinia that was everywhere. This was a picture from 2022. My goodness, it was thick. This is Myriophyllum. There were lots of Myriophyllum, lots of the spattered dock water lily type plants that were just lush back then are now, they're still there, but they're not lush anymore. This has disappeared. This has disappeared. Any questions about that salinity?
Well, again, as you went down the road, you were answering my questions, which is great. But one thing I was thinking about is, I think you'll probably talk about this, having this sort of updated, what's happening with the aquatic vegetation and all that will be so helpful because, as you say, it's coming and going and depends on, you know, the seasons, and it's eventually just gradually going to be getting worse. And that's something that we're just going to have to, you know, to deal with. So I think, you know, these updates that will be given out will be very helpful in terms of, you know, because it's moving. It's a moving target.
It is a moving target, Barbara. And, you know, climate change is not something that goes in a nice steady line either. It's got little spurts and little fallbacks and spurts and fallbacks. So, but the overall long-term trend appears to be that, yes, salinity is going to increase in Dog River, slowly but surely moving upstream. And if you're in one of those transition zones, that has implications for what you would even plant in your yard down close to it. Or if you're doing a living shoreline, it has some serious implications for what shall I plant? Because you want something that's going to succeed in the long term, not something that's going to be the best competitor maybe today, but that's going to be there 10 years from now.
Right.
And I think that's something that
we have even, you know, some of our members live in one of those transition zones and have recently, you know, really been talking about where have the cypress trees in that area gone to.
Yeah.
So this explains that. And, you know, it causes navigation safety concerns as well when you have what is like a solid island at one point now that you know, you can't really tell it's even there. So they want to definitely go back with something, but maybe they need saltier plants, right?
Yeah, and there are really no trees that grow in salt water. You know, that's something that we don't have. So you notice as you drive down towards Dolphin Island that the trees disappear. And add salt marsh vegetation, but the only woody vegetation at all is Baccharis. It sort of can take a little bit of salt, but most things can't. So you're going to lose that tree cover. You have other grassy type things and sedges that can grow in salty water, but not trees. Those fall out until we get to the tropics.
Okay, so I just did a little tour of the Fowl River project that NEP is doing, and one thing they were doing was filling in with, you know, the proper sediment that had been tested. But you know, what are your thoughts about that? Is that something that's going to gradually just, you know, it seems to be working, and people are, you know, I've talked to people on both sides of that fence, but you know, I know that they've restored a good bit of it. And what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful project, and I'm amazed at what they've been able to do with it. But it is dependent on being nourished.
Right.
It will have to be nourished eventually again. One of the things that does destroy areas like that, though, and there are plenty of studies that show that boat wakes are a problem for these areas that are, particularly these transition zones. And I know there was a study out in, that was in the Chesapeake Bay, that basically they came to the conclusion that motorboats with wakes, any kind of wakes, should not be closer to shore than 150 feet. And if the river wasn't wide enough for them to stay 150 feet away from both shores, then you should basically have no wake zones.
Wow.
And that's something that I think we probably should have to address, because the boat wakes are part of the erosion. I see that here in Halls Mill Creek, but where I live, it's 200 feet wide. And yet we have boats coming through with big wakes all the time. And we're in that zone where we're transitioning from fresh to salt. So
Right.
the trees, the things along the shoreline, there's a huge amount of shoreline erosion going on here right now. And I know nobody wants to have a no wake zone, but maybe we need to get people to think about it that way. You're always asking, what can one person do? Well, maybe if you have a big boat, you really need to pay attention to your wake.
Yes.
That channel's less than 200 feet wide or less than 300 feet wide. You really should be in a no wake zone.
Right.